In today's video, we will discuss the C2 config menu versus the user interface (UI) settings. This C2 controller is connected to a hotspot, and the configuration page can be accessed at 192.168.43.169/config. Besides the normal user interface, there is a C2 interface, and it can be accessed at 192.168.43.169/C2 in this case. The C2 interface emulates the OLED display and physical buttons of the C2 controller. Depending on your device, click or tap the virtual buttons to send commands similar to pressing the physical buttons on the controller. The power button can be used to confirm or cancel certain operations and to show the battery percentage. If necessary, press the power button again to exit. Let's get started. The first option on the config menu, Simple Advanced Mode, corresponds to the Simple Mode checkbox on the configuration page, which is checked by default. The User's Guide QR Code option has no equivalent setting on the user interface. The MECHA ID is displayed on the configuration page in the AP Mode SSID field, and also on the row page below the Info button. Scroll to the bottom of the configuration page and see the MAC address above the firmware version, and the dynamic IP address, a few lines below. The battery percentage is displayed on the row page except when MECHA is powered via the USB port. In that case, no percentage is shown. Battery warning allows you to set the battery min value. There is a similar setting on the configuration page. MECHA shows a warning on the display at a voltage closer to battery min, which is 12 volts in this case. MECHA can be set to shut down automatically on either the config menu or the row page after a certain number of minutes of inactivity, or to remain on indefinitely. The FCC ID is displayed only on the config menu. The UI equivalent setting for the Plus Assistant option is, the IP of Plus MECHA Assistant ends in. We have already published 2 videos about Plus Assistant. There isn't a setting in the UI comparable to the OLED step-by-step option, but the UI can be used to shoot in step-by-step mode, as we demonstrated in the video shooting in step-by-step mode with MECHA. Disabling and enabling a motor, or both motors simultaneously, can be achieved using these OLED menu options: Motor 1, Motor 2, Motor 1 and 2. Certain codes can also be used for these purposes, but the OLED options are much easier to use. Degrees move alternates with real move, and switching between the two options is only possible if the Allow Degrees, Real Move Switching checkbox is checked on the configuration page. Degrees move is enabled by default, and the Real Move checkbox is not checked on the configuration page. If checked, Real Move will be on. Change Sense Right Left and Up Down have equivalent settings on the configuration page, and these are: swap the left-right rotation when done by MECHA buttons. Swap the up-down rotation when done by MECHA buttons. The OLED arrow speed option is equivalent to the UI arrow button speed setting. The OLED interval and interval speed options are equivalent to the arrow buttons interval and interval speed in the configuration page. Similarly, the level amount and show hints settings can also be found there. Default Wi-Fi can also be set on the configuration page. It is the first setting on this page. Connect to Wi-Fi. Instructs MECHA to attempt connection to the last known Wi-Fi network, while the UI Connect to Wi-Fi button initiates the process of connecting to a Wi-Fi network, allowing you to choose from the available networks to use MECHA in STA, station, mode. The equivalent of the Wi-Fi test option is a UI page that can be accessed at IP/Wi-Fi test. Keep page on the config menu and the UI setting, keep the same menu page on OLED, are equivalent settings. To use the Nodal Ninja IR remote, ensure either this OLED option is set to on or the related checkbox is checked on the configuration page. The IR remote test option does not have a UI equivalent setting. OLED status during exposure can be set using the at shoot option. There is no UI equivalent setting for this option. Similarly, other OLED-related options, like OLED test, OLED brightness, OLED offset X, and OLED offset Y, do not have UI equivalents. The shutter confirmation settings on the configuration page should not be confused with the shutter confirmation test option on the OLED menu. To perform this test, C1 users can use the code 32313. The RAW interface can be enabled or disabled using the OLED option or the Enable RAW Interface checkbox. Beta features can be enabled or disabled on both the OLED menu and the configuration page. The same applies to rotator settings and backlash compensation. The i3 Real Move options are related to Real Move options and have no UI equivalent. The zenith and nadir positions can be set on both the OLED menu and UI. Rotator 2 sensor can be activated only on the OLED menu. Rotator positions option allows you to specify whether the rotator 1 and C2 controller are connected using the lower cable or the upper cable. The UI checkbox, swap the 1-2 motor cables, is its equivalent setting. The firmware can be updated using the update option in the same way as clicking the update button on the UI. Similarly, the reboot option and UI reboot button perform the same function. The firmware version can be displayed on the OLED and is also displayed at the top of the row page. Update using a hotspot initiates the process of updating the firmware using a hotspot, the same as code 3121223, recommended for the C1 controller. Similarly, the reset config to default and factory reset options function as their name imply. OLED less noise and UI less noise for E-rotators are equivalent settings. Finally, quiet loud beep is a simplified setting for the beep setting found on the row page. The C2 settings can be changed via numeric codes only when advanced mode is activated. However, because the C2 controller features an intuitive OLED menu system, the product documentation prioritizes those instructions. For the C1 controller, which relies on LED indicators, these codes are an easy-to-use configuration tool. Thank you for watching.